Welcome, comrades. You're listening to The Party Line, a podcast from The Ditch. This is a special episode to mark our 21st. That's right, The Party Line is coming of age. And I know it sounds kind of corny, but when I discovered how few podcasts make it past 20 episodes, I realized that it's a real thing, actually, and that we could, in fact, celebrate reaching 21 episodes with a highlights program. So what you're going to hear and see if you're watching over the next hour or so are bits and pieces from the episodes that we've done thus far. They're organized in non-chronological order, so you'll see us jumping around with different cameras, different lights. You might hear different microphones as we move between episodes, but what you'll hear and see throughout is a bunch of really special and great guests that we're very delighted to have had over the past several months. And if you check the show notes, you'll see the order and who the guests are and which episodes they relate to. But they're people uniformly who bring expertise, who bring engagement, and who came into the studio, into whatever space they were interviewed, unencumbered by any party line. And that, of course, was facilitated greatly by my co-host, Niamh Bhriain, who brings her own expertise, her own passion, and her own vivid curiosity to each of the episodes as well. And you'll be hearing from Niamh plenty throughout this show. But you'll be hearing first from, if you like, our hosts, the guys from The Ditch, Eoghan McNeill, Paulie Doyle, Roman Shortall. Their participation in this podcast has been absolutely invaluable. The stories that The Ditch do, I don't have to tell you, are great and important stories that we're delighted to be able to talk about on the podcast. But in addition to their presence, what the Ditch have given to the party line is their trust. I've been able to run this podcast, as it were, with Niamh independently. I don't get paid by the Ditch or by anybody else, but without the Ditch, it's not possible. And I really appreciate what they do, and I know that you do too.
If you can't do what you really intended to do as a journalist, to report morally and to push for accountability, what good is that? And that's when I first time got introduced to The Ditch, and it was like a moment of fresh air that I felt like I'm not the only one.
Paulie called him first on Friday, and he answered the phone and he said, "I'm a journalist, would you have time to answer a few questions?" And as soon as Paulie said, "I'd like to speak to you about your relationship with Jeffrey Epstein," he was like, "Can I call you back in 20 minutes?" And he hung up the phone, didn't call back, and we repeatedly called him over the next few days. And just before we were publishing, I was calling him. We published on Tuesday. I was calling, and next thing is my phone starts ringing, and I say Eric Frad, and like he'd arse-dialled me. I was there on the phone with him for about 10 minutes, and I was going, Eric, hello, Eric. I was texting him, "Can you hear me, Eric?" I was like, "Right, fine. Will you comment on your relationship with Jeffrey Epstein?"
Like if I say to you, the media in the Free State is populated by serious guys, I don't actually need to elaborate much more than that for you to kind of know the type of guy that I'm talking about. Pat Leahy or Daniel McConnell or Stephen Collins or, any of these guys. They're from a certain class background and they all share a certain set of concerns. They're concerned about Ireland's place in Europe.
What will they think of us?
Yeah, they're concerned about fighting the scourge of populism, or most importantly of all, they're concerned about house prices in South County Dublin, right? And they are the self-appointed arbiters of what opinions and people are acceptable and what opinions and people are not acceptable. And the way that they determine this is with appeals to seriousness. Who's a serious person? What ideas are serious? And what people and ideas are the latter. So if you read Pat Leahy's work, or any of these guys, you constantly see things like, how is Ireland supposed to be taken seriously unless X? Mm-hmm. Is this particular minister a serious person when they've done Y? Anybody who diverts from basically what the neoliberal consensus demands is branded as a non-serious actor.
Micheál Martin does this thing where he's very careful, like most politicians, with his words. but this time wasn't careful enough, it seems. So he was in Philadelphia for his Trump administration visit for St. Patrick's Day, and he was asked Eoghan, what was going on basically with Shannon in the context of the war in Iran. And he said that there were no weapons going through Shannon Airport. He said that the chartered flights that we've been reporting on, which are airlines like Omni Air, run these chartered flights with troops on them, but they are under the command of the US military, despite being civilian planes, and they're allowed pass through Shannon Airport. But he said that they are only flights coming back from the Middle East. He said there's nothing wrong with that, and he said that there's no weapons on board. Couple of days later, we basically got confirmation from the Department of Transport that that's not true. So he was lying when he said, and we said it as it is. We don't kind of, hold back. He lied. He said there's no weapons going through Shannon. There is weapons.
Yeah.
Micheál Martin is kind of so afraid of upsetting Washington that they won't enforce Irish law on these companies that have, quite clearly broken the law, bringing munitions illegally through the state. And they look the other way on that. But if Jim O'Callaghan wants to deport some Nigerian children to make a political point, then the law is the law. But if there's a large, powerful company bringing weapons through Ireland, well then, how could we possibly be expected to, enforce the law on them?
Speaking of hapless elites, tell us about John Stevens.
John Stevens is the Fianna Fáil by-election candidate for Dublin.
Dublin Central. Yeah.
So he lied on a planning permission application for a second home. And he lied about it again when I called him and asked him why he lied. So there's a whole there's a whole web of lies.
No.
He declared. We started looking at him, and he declared this. It's a pretty big house, 4 bedrooms in Galway, as farmland. Right. So he had a house there that had been declared as farmland. It was actually a house. We looked at the planning permission application for it, and there were these kind of restricted documents associated with him, proving that he needs the home to the council, right? So we asked the council for the documents. They said, no, we won't give them to you. We threatened legal action. They said, here you go. Here are the documents.
Good old Ditch threats of legal action.
Yes.
It was on in the piece where he gives Keir Starmer his due, and, he says something like a word of admiration for Keir Starmer, something not being said in Britain in many circles at the moment. So he does give the little bit of a caveat, but he says something along the lines of about Keir Starmer and what he's done for Irish-British relations. Sean Browne's family are looking for an inquiry into his assassination back in the mid-90s. Sean Browne, who was a GAA chairperson in Derry, he was abducted outside his Gaelic football club and he was killed. And the British State Coroner's report into his killing says that they're quite careful with their language. They estimate that there were more than 20 people involved in his death, and that among those were British state agents. Mm-hmm. The Browne family are looking for an inquiry into his death, which Starmer's government, Hilary Benn, who Liberals love, are completely resisting and are fighting in court, because they know that were this inquiry to be held, it would completely obliterate any pretense of a separation between loyalist paramilitaries and the British state.
The factory is located, as I said, like in a place called Ulm in Germany. That's the Elbit Deutschland factory. And of course, as we know, Elbit Systems is an Israeli weapons maker. It supplies, I think, 80 or 85% of the IDF's land defence requirements, weaponry and so on. So they are like the largest supplier of weapons overall to the IDF.
They also supply other countries. I think we've reported on some of it as well. But they are making target acquisition systems in this place in Germany. And at the time that this alleged action took place, which I think it was in August or September last year, there was no, I think, documentary evidence tying Elbit Deutschland to Elbit Israel in terms of, the export of military goods. But the Ditch then reported that it had got its hands on some records which showed exactly what was being shipped from Germany to Israel, and those items were target acquisition systems. And what those are, they're basically, what it says in the tin. They're to put a target on people's backs. They've been used to target civilians in Gaza. They're laser target acquisition systems. And they might not be actual weapons that fire bullets, but those are the things that are used to make the Israeli killing machine more efficient.
We carried a story about two senior lawyers from Mason, Hayes and Curran. One of them is actually he is the chairperson of the firm, a guy called Philip Nolan. And then there was Oisin Tobin, who is a senior partner who specializes in tech law. Mm-hmm. Because it was interesting to see and obviously we're going to be talking about tech's expansion into our lives, but in Ireland, tech has expanded into our territory, and some people, like myself, would say that Ireland, arguably post-colonial state, we're colonised by foreign capital now, largely in the form of American tech companies. And I've got to say, the two guys who were going to this secret society event run by Peter Thiel, really nice case studies in Irish compradors. Mm-hmm. The people who are, because obviously this colonisation, no more than, when Walter Rodney spoke about how Europe had colonised Africa, he wrote about the Africans who facilitated and enabled that and took on the manners and aesthetics of their colonisers. In Ireland, we've got people in the professional services who come up with the tax structures, come up with a suite of tax and accounting advisories to bring these multinationals here. And Mason, Hayes and Curran is a good example of a firm that it's a real significant part of their business. Philip Nolan is actually Facebook's external counsel here in Ireland. The firm also represents people like Adobe, Qualtrics and other big American multinationals. And when the two guys, when they said that they were going to attend this Peter Thiel event, they had to submit information for their bios. And, the chair, Philip Nolan, he's got a little bit in his bio where he was asked to give an interesting fact about himself. And he did a comparison of Bill Clinton and Mikhail Gorbachev's handshakes.
Nobody cried out when Boy George asked the Late Show audience.
A bat signal.
Yes.
Somebody like these events and goes up in the air, and then all of these various actors in the media and online on social media kind of activate. And they have to use, it's kind of funny that it's Boy George. They'll use like whatever material, they have to use whatever material they have. So they're like, look at this brave, virtuous man who in 2009 was convicted of chaining a sex worker to a radiator in his house and did 15 months in prison. He's bravely defending the Jewish people, and the Irish people are...
the Irish people are disgraced.
Contemptuous towards him.
And, this week as well, the kind of stuff that really gets to me, Pascal Donohoe tweeted this week about he's on his way to Cairo. And he tweeted a picture about the book he's reading before he goes to Cairo with the World Bank. And it was a book written by a World Bank colleague.
Right.
And it was about Egypt's reform. And,
Right.
you know, he said, because Pascal Donohoe is, you know, he's one of our intellects, he's a thinking man.
Right. So Pascal Donohoe is our former finance minister, now gone to a very senior job in the World Bank, and sort of showing his collegiality within this new space. Right?
And, you know, I've got to say, like, to be clear, I don't really care that he's being paid 600 grand a year. I also
very senior job. Yeah.
You know, because, you know, something like this happens and it makes for a good headline. People get angry, et cetera, et cetera. The extra 10 million that he signed off in Ireland's funding for the World Bank in one of his last acts as finance minister, a little bit on the dodgier side, right? Fine. But like, it's the nature of his work as an Irishman that really gets to me, that he was a finance minister in this arguably post-colonial state at the absolute whim of foreign capital and American multinationals. The first thing he does for those years of service is to go to the World Bank, and now he's going to Cairo and going and holding up the book of the World Bank, of the World Bank colleague, and you know, saying, I'm a good little Paddy, you know.
Yeah.
And to me, I put the tax lawyers like Philip Nolan and Oisin Tobin in that bracket, going to a Peter Thiel event and going, I shook hands with Bill Clinton. Like,
Interesting overlap between what we're talking about, the World Bank, and that pressure at the domestic Irish level, where the Ditch also reported on Pascal Donohoe having a conversation with his Israeli counterpart to say that the Occupied Territories Bill won't happen. And Pascal has now become the number 2 person at the World Bank, where in a sense, he's reaped the rewards that the Irish elite gets from participation in these global networks of dependent development by being elevated. And that's part of the motivation as well for why the Irish elite, apart from just cowardice, why they've also gone that route, is it's quite lucrative for elements of that elite. And doubtless he will continue to be a loyal servant of empire in his position at the bank.
So that's a lot of Helen McEntee's regrets that we've dealt with.
She's been very vocal and busy on this. Yeah, and it gives you a taste of what we're going to be listening to for the next 6 months now when they take the presidency. It's not going to be nice.
She's another Patrick O'Donovan, though, where I'm like, you know, there are certain Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil politicians where I understand their politics and their ideology, what they believe and what they're advancing. Helen McEntee as Foreign Affairs Minister, like, what is your worldview? Like, what exactly are you building for Ireland, advancing for Ireland? Like, what is the actual vision? Even if it's one that I don't believe in myself, like, what is it?
I think their vision is total subservience to the European Union. They come from that class of people who are just love Europe. Like, they're the same class of people who years ago here loved the Brits. They want to be in with the master, and anything that's Irish and different is inherently embarrassing. We were an embarrassment and a disgrace because we didn't go along with everyone else. Oh my God, the embarrassment. We'd be making a show of ourselves with our European friends. But actually, and as the safe scrutiny by the Finance Committee shows, Ireland is one of the few countries, we're the only people who get a chance at a referendum. It's great that the Oireachtas Committee did scrutinise it, because I can guarantee you no such scrutiny has applied anywhere else in Europe. And we know the citizens of all the other European countries are pretty much like the Irish ones. They prefer to have their money being spent on, you know, a roof over their head, a pension, health service, rather than their young fellas being frog-marked into a sort of cannon fodder for European wars, which is the only future that's being developed for them. If you're a German young fella now, you're engaged in complete propaganda all the time. The Russians are coming, we have to rearm up to 2030. It's going to take us that length of time to match the Russians. No jobs, all deindustrialisation. So go into the car factories, and then those of you are into the bomb factories now that used to be car factories, and those of you that don't make that, you can go to the front lines now. And off you go, and the rest of you follow them.
I think one thing that is important about bringing it back to this economic or material sort of scale is that we also see the contradictions of this FDI model in terms of the fuel protests and in terms of the lack of infrastructural provision. So it's not just a question of we support Palestine and we have solidarity with Palestine and, that's sort of kind of a moral a point, and that is constrained by this dependence on the US. We also see it in terms of cost of living and in terms of, people's ability to access housing, people's ability to access, energy or renewable energy, any of these things. And I think the more that we can highlight the contradictions of that model in terms of cost of living, in terms of the costs of the model, not the benefits of the model, but the costs of the model and who carries the costs, the more chance we have of building some kind of space to think about an alternative.
And, the amount of cables, these cables, that are, that Ireland needs to protect, and again, we need to grow up and, do our part, whatever, which again is obviously a complete red herring, right? You cut one of these cables and latency drops for 30 minutes and, it reroutes and it's all fine, right? It's completely, again, a sort of ideological discursive argument more so than anything that's actually rooted in, the technical character of, protecting infrastructure, right?
It is fair to say that the print media is often hostile to RTE, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, there was historically that tension over advertising apart from anything else, and competition about advertising. So the Independent would have been hostile. But then, of course, they co-opted the most hostile of all, Brendan O'Connor, into the building, which maybe was a clever idea because he certainly lost a lot of his anger and he plays by the rules. And he's building audiences for RTE, so
very diverse guests as well.
I mean, well, indeed, that was one point that I was going to make.
We'll go on and make it.
Go on. His panels are to I won't say the right of Genghis Khan, but they are often to the right of the government, which is the really salient point.
In general, I just think it's really telling that that publishing really basic political statements from another country is seen as some kind of unheard of propaganda. But it's also telling because, all those people are forced to read us too. We have so much information that we know makes it to the Pentagon and the White House that we're there sort of reading our stories to understand what the Iranian perspective is. So it's sort of this funny thing where, they come out against us pretty virulently, and we are definitely always watching for that. But on the other hand, I think that we've succeeded in making ourselves a bit indispensable for those very same people.
The Wallace Wells piece is kind of exemplary in this regard of finding the debate within the tech sector as being the relevant debate about AI. That and in effect, as you suggest, that some of what passes for debate is really a kind of a way of saying, hey, we're the big guys now. We're in charge. We may be taking you to hell, but we're the only drivers you got. And that the debate, in other words, is kind of a form of marketing and of assertion of power and primacy.
Oh, totally, right? Like their debate is a way of, I think, trying to mark and reinforce whether or not it's intentional or sort of intentional, or just an emergent future. It marks the powerlessness of the majority of people. It marks the absolute end of anything that had once been celebrated as democracy or participatory democracy, where they don't even bother legitimating it, right? Or they can say, hypothetically, it might be good, but it'll wipe out half of the jobs. It can empower bad actors. It can put terrible hands in the hands of all sorts of criminal organizations that can unleash bioterrorism and nuclear war and destroy all of our data and so on and so on. Like every possible thing that one could imagine, they've already brought up and saying, but yet it's inevitable that we make it. And you, little people, you can do nothing about it. Like, it's really like a giant demonstration of the power of a tech elite over the rest of us. And I'd say it's the end of anything like political legitimacy. To me, there's like that kind of parallel between the rising authoritarianism or sort of fascism of Trump and the tech sector. It's not just that they help each other's interest. It's that they both have this performance of everyone else's lack of power at the heart of what they're doing. And that's one of the huge, I think, political effects of the kind of myth around AI is you can do nothing about it. This is inevitable. We can force this down your throats for good or ill. Some of us will get very, very rich, and the rest of you will become a permanent underclass.
I want to ask you about liberals making peace with this particular manifestation that we're seeing now of fascism. Are we seeing that in Italy? That not only that the right-wingers are taking over these institutions, but these institutions are also adjusting themselves.
Yeah, well, you know, that, I mean, that's the classic way that Mussolini actually took over Italy. You know, it was a liberal dominated parliament, and the liberals thought, yeah, they could live with Mussolini for a bit, and he'd stop the unions. And you know, you were kind of just coming out of the Biennio Rosso, the famous 2 years when strikes by anarchists and communists all over Italy. They took over factories, they took over farms, demanding their rights and fair pay and so on like that. And this was seen by the liberals, of course, who all came from very wealthy families, as, you know, utter chaos, anarchy, you know, in that sense that the liberals understand the term, you know. And so they thought, okay, we can live with a strong man for a while and he'll take care of these guys and then we'll come back again, you know. If you've ever seen Il Gattopardo, The Leopard, or indeed read the book, which is a beautiful, beautiful book, you know, there's a line in it which is often quoted here, which is where the father, the leopard himself, is telling his son or his nephew, I forget which, that he needs to go into Parliament, even though they hate the Parliament in Rome, you know, because they're Sicilians. And he says, look, everything has to change so that everything has to stay the same. And that's very much the liberal approach here. And here, at the present moment, you have the same thing.
Between 2017 and 2020, Morgan McSweeney ran this think tank called Labour Together, through which he, we now know, pursued these secret projects to destroy the prospects of a Corbyn-led Labour Party, and then to choose effectively Keir Starmer as Corbyn's replacement, as the means by which they could recapture the Labour Party for what is increasingly being revealed to be a sort of a Mandelsonian politics, or sort of a politics that's pliant or acceptable to the Mandelson-Epstein class. And during this period of time between 2018 and 2020, they're taking in hundreds of thousands of pounds of donations, which they're not reporting in violation of electoral law. There's a pretty clear-eyed sense from people like Morgan McSweeney, who was Chief of Staff to the Prime Minister, and his associates, that you couldn't really displace Jeremy Corbyn democratically. You couldn't actually beat him in the Labour Party in a battle of ideas. And we now know that actually the role of Labour Together, this organisation that Morgan McSweeney headed for ages, was very profound in stoking the anti-Semitism crisis in very particular ways and with certain types of impacts. One of which I think people are only beginning to understand it now, is that the form of the argument of the anti-Semitism crisis was to try and through the media and basically through alarmist reporting and sort of building a constant sense of hype, is to build a bedrock of evidence to prove that anti-Semitism is inherent in being in the leftist tradition. That in fact anti-Semitism is one of the inevitable endpoint expressions of anti-imperialism and leftist thinking.
On a lower level, there's a lot of violence that is happening within US society that we don't know about because it's not big enough to get in the nationals. Like if you look in local newspapers, the whole veteran community or parts of it are involved in criminal activity. And I do look at local news reports and see that again, because you're talking about 2 million people. That's how many people served. It's a huge, that's so many people. And even if a small fraction of those are neo-Nazis that have high-level military training, that's a huge, huge worry. And the gangs is another massive thing, because the gangs in terms of numbers is the most serious. At one point, a serious analyst told me that he reckoned that 10% of the US military was was gangs, and there was things like they couldn't do basic troop movements within the United States because one group of troops had one gang in it, and a base already had this other gang. So you're talking about it having real impact on just basic things like being able to move troops to different bases. And again, they're in it for military training, and because of the US bases. And the US military is actually a very good institution for drug traffickers to be part of, because you have a degree of freedom on a US base, which you don't have in wider society. You obviously have access to weapons, and a bunch of very important bases are on the border with Mexico, Fort Bliss being the main one. And there was countless reports of US military active duty being involved in drug trafficking and working with and for Mexican drug cartels.
So that you have an actual arms gap which is opening up between the United States and what emerges as its competitor powers in the 21st century, which is China in particular, which has to do simply with the erosion through greed of the military-industrial base. We have a system, a context now in which the United States simply does not have an air defense system which can compete, say, with the Russian S-400 anti-aircraft system. It doesn't have a ballistic missile system that can compare with the Russian or Chinese ballistic missile systems, and as has emerged with the Iranian ballistic missile system.
Right.
And that is astonishing when one considers the advances which the United States had as recently as the 1990s.
Sounds like state failure in a sense.
It is state failure, and it's state failure which comes through profit-seeking, greed, and political elites, in fact, who are relaxed with these private entities.
We're told that it's this great initiative for jobs and for workers, for economic growth, but the reality is that military spending has a key beneficiary, and that's the shareholders of arms companies. So in the Anglo-American context, those shareholders are big institutional investors, so BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street. And what you see is that because the arms companies get so much support from governments, they're obviously receiving government contracts, their money comes from governments, they're also getting direct subsidies as well. So their research and development costs are paid for on their behalf by the taxpayer. Often in the case of BAE Systems, about 85% of its research and development costs are paid for on its behalf. And that means that they're able to make reliable and steady profits, which then flow out in the form of payouts to shareholders, dividends, share buybacks. So again, in the Anglo-American context, what happens when you look at the financial data is basically that these companies, the British and American arms companies, they pay out to their shareholders at a higher rate than the rest of the stock market index, so that they're able to turn this government spending into a source of private profit.
I think when I left, it was Obama's administration, and before I even talk or cover anything broad and touches on different countries in the world, when we evacuated, my daughter was 1 year old, and she was injured, and she was a U.S. citizen. She was not a dual citizen. She was a U.S. citizen only, and that was on purpose to provide her with whatever protection I couldn't have. And that was a big mistake because the U.S. Embassy simply said to her evacuation, we're not going to do it, not because we can't, but because you chose to go to Palestine. And it was very petty kind of response. And that delayed her evacuation by 3 weeks, which she had internal bleeding. And in case of internal bleeding, people would understand how crucial the 3 weeks would be. She's 13 years old now, and we just revisited hospitals after 7 years of her first years were spent in hospitals, and we thought we're done, and now we're back to a more privileged level of suffering, and I resent that. I hate that so much, because every time I hear someone talking about from my U.S. friends or U.S. journalists about the good times of Obama, where fascism was not a thing, it doesn't take me a second to think of my own family where their slaughter was very much permitted during the Obama administration.
So actually, Leila and I were pretty shocked that Ireland is where it's at with these kinds of debates, that there hasn't been more that's been done so far. I mean, outside when we were in Palestine, we had the sense, and we know that the Irish people are very supportive of Palestine and have been out on the streets pressuring their government. But at the same time, we were shocked that this is where we're at, that this is the bare minimum that should have been done. And this bill was proposed more than 8 years ago. And as we've been saying, the landscape has changed. This is post-genocide. This bill should have been passed a long, long time ago. And now they've also stripped it of the meat of the bill, which is removing the services. And that's 70% of trade with the illegal colonies in the occupied Palestinian territories. So with removing the services, it's just paying lip service to the people and telling them, to the Irish people, and telling them that we're doing something.
Too little, too late, literally, yeah.
100%.
Yeah, Leila, would you agree with that?
I agree, and I think the Irish government, it feels like, is really trying to throw crumbs at the public. To say, hey, look, we're doing something to appease you, while also at the same time kind of piggybacking off of the Irish population's support of Palestine. So like abroad, people are like, oh, Ireland, they're so pro-Palestine, they do all of this work. And so people kind of automatically assume that the government's policies reflect this, when it, in reality, doesn't. And like Zaina was saying, we've moved past the point of putting forward little teeny tiny policies that don't make a huge effect on Israel. Post-genocide, post-decades of occupation and the oppression of Palestinian people, what we really need to be pushing for is a sanctions bill, a full sanctions bill on Israel. That is the one thing that would address the issue that's at hand and actually reflect the positions that people are saying and the positions of people on the ground. And instead, we're getting this teeny tiny bill that's throwing crumbs.
For me, one of the most poignant things in the whole period of the last couple of years in Gaza, I mean, there's obviously been the so much horrendous imagery and footage and descriptions of the onslaught. But there was this video, I don't know if you would have seen it, of a young man in Gaza who had gone back to his house after it had been destroyed, but he was able to get back there, and he found his old international law textbook in the rubble, and he's making this video of himself describing how, he thought this was going to be the something that would help Palestinians to escape from the siege and the blockade and the situation they had been under in Gaza. And, Rafif Ziada talks about this in one of her poems or one of her pieces about how we, as Palestinians, diligently learn our UN resolutions and our Geneva Conventions articles, and we recite them in our best articulation when we're on the BBC or whatever. But still, it's not enough. And so this young man is basically filming himself burning his international law book, saying, this is worthless and meaningless. And and this was, there was this horrendous kind of phenomenon during the winters, particularly in Gaza, where people were burning their books as fuel because they had no other fuel left for heating, and that the symbolism of that, I think, was very stark. And so it's true, that sometimes we're having these ridiculous arguments, and it got to a point of really, I don't know if you would have seen this, but it got to a point of just absurdity at the International Court of Justice, where in one of the decisions on the plausible genocide and that what should the court exactly be ordering to stop the Israeli military doing in Rafah, they were arguing about the meaning of a comma and the placement of a comma.
Have put pressure on the governing bodies to remove Russia and Belarus, which they did. So very swift action, very decisive action. They're not doing the same with Israel. And it's actually very ironic because Infantino has called for, he does not want to remove Israel. He thinks that will be a defeat, he said. But it's ironic because he actually oversaw the decision in removing Russia from competition. So they're acting, again, totally hypocritical. They have actually ignored so many human rights reports from international organizations that have declared what they're doing as contravening and aiding and abetting contravening international law. And they've also been ignoring the Palestinian Football Association, who have been for 13 years now trying to regain this political and legal ownership over their own territory. And they've been submitting complaints and breaches of statutes for the last 13 years that FIFA ignores. FIFA even had their own internal monitoring committee in 2017 who said, you need to dismantle these clubs or remove these clubs. They ignored that too. So they continue to ignore all these contraventions of their own statutes and international law. They continue to facilitate by the inclusion of this in global football structures. And yeah, as you mentioned earlier, you have to understand, the power of football and kind of the cultural and commercial domination that it has, and that the impact of a sporting boycott of Israel and a removal of Israel could have serious impact, on the whole landscape of sanctioning Israel and sanctioning this egregious regime, because as we know from apartheid South Africa, the sporting boycott was a decisive factor in bringing that to an end.
This is the way Israel operates, I feel. They just try and do really dastardly shit, and they see how much pushback they get. And they've gotten away with so much in the last 2.5 years. I'd be concerned about the guy's safety. But the point I'm coming to is the brutality with which they have received this flotilla, beating the shit out of the other participants, like kidnapping the lads and trying to put some bogus charges on them for connections to terrorism, which is everyone who pushes back against Israel at all under any circumstances is a terrorist. I mean, Miss Rachel is a terrorist, I'm a terrorist, you guys are all terrorists. That has surprised me because they've been so brutal, it's now making it a story. So now everyone is actually talking about it. Had they not acted with this level of brutality, had they not abducted people 1,000 nautical miles from Gaza, it wouldn't have been a story. And this is the thing with Israel that blows my mind, and it's evidence that it's a ideology, and the US-Israel axis is an empire on its last legs because it only knows escalation.
I mean, I'm from Clare and my family in Cork, and lots of people in my family were out in the protest with their tractors.
Yeah.
And that, I don't know that they would, if they were asked, are you right wing, are you left wing, they probably wouldn't even, categorise themselves in any which way, but just we have to go out and make a living. The situation is that right now we can't do that. And we are protesting that fact. And I kind of hate the way people try and categorise just normal people, try to put them into boxes. And, there was so much kind of honing in the media on certain personalities that had, court convictions, or there was something about a guy who apparently had some animal abuse case, or that was kind of headline news for a day and a half, and it's like that's a distraction. What's actually happening here is that there are hundreds, maybe thousands of people out protesting because they cannot make ends meet, and we should all get behind that because we're all struggling in one way or another. We're all trying to pay bills, and I think there's definitely a kind of those kind of backward, ignorant people down the country, they're all racists and they're all whatever. And it's like, well, hold on a second. But even I was in Dublin during the protests, and I went down to O'Connell Street a few times and walked along, and, I didn't see anything that I thought, that's trouble.
Some of the people who are having their rents reviewed are people who are in receipt of an allowance for people who have full-time jobs, but for whom the cost of living crisis has dictated that they can't afford rent. So some of these people who are as good an example of any that the market doesn't work are those being affected by it. So it's a fight about rents in South County Dublin, but it's also a fight about, what is housing? Who rules us? Is it just the market?
Yeah, and who dictates whether you can have a home or not? Yeah. And on what basis? Is it driven by profit? Is it because housing should be a basic right? Yeah, I had a conversation over the weekend about what is an affordable home. Like if we there are certain homes that are kind of put out there as these are affordable homes, which is to say, and actually a lot of them are not, but that is to say then that we also have unaffordable homes. You know, this is the terminology that we're using, I suppose. So there's these French vehicles that the Irish government is looking to acquire in the French arms deal, and there's two things that are problematic here. So the first thing is that these vehicles will use AI to automatically identify targets and aim at perceived threats. So that is a gun that will be able to be manoeuvred based on information that is acquired through AI to manoeuvre the gun into position where it is actually able to fire at a perceived threat. So the first is identifying the target, and then these will actually be able to fire. So they will be able to fire automatically on a target without human input. Right. Now, the first thing has been used in warfare, and we've seen that, and that connects in with what Roman was saying. In Gaza, we've seen how artificial intelligence has been used. You know, it's been extensively documented. Technologies like Lavender or Where's Daddy, you know, really horrific use of this AI-generated content where they will then go through all of this data and they will use that to target people in Gaza.
Mention it. You know, even if your main thing is to say, yeah, all the cool kids think Cuba is cool or whatever, but we know better. You'd have to say something about the basic material reality.
Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, this is the blockade on Cuba. It's not a fiction. It's been voted on 33 times at the United Nations General Assembly. It's something that's being actively implemented and intensified for decades. But yeah, he decided, as you know, this piece is actually just one of many in terms of how the aid convoy to Cuba was covered. And just on NECAP, I mean, I saw a number of, while I was in Cuba, I didn't have that much access to internet because I'm not great with tech, and I had bought an eSIM, which I failed to activate. And then I couldn't get a Cuban SIM card while I was there. So I only saw a lot of this coverage actually after I left Cuba, and one of the things that I saw repeatedly was that NECAP actually caused the nationwide blackout, which is just an incredible twist on the fact that because of the blockade, again, you know, if you don't talk about the blockade as the cause for the blackout, then let's blame it on NECAP or, you know, all of these people who went to Cuba with the aid flotilla, and that we signified such an increment on the Cuban resources that we caused the blackout. So all of these things to say, you know, to avoid actually speaking about the reality, which is that Cuba has been under an illegal blockade for over 6 decades.
So but there is an awful lot of, you know, basically they did us proud at this event. And this is one of these events where we want to make sure that we've been done proud, isn't it? You know, in the face of these important foreigners who found themselves here.
But it's also just all of this information that's so irrelevant, like that the Ryanair flight from Brussels was delayed, that they had some potatoes, that somebody gave somebody else a wallop on the back. Like, you know, it's kind of this, like, it's a hollowing out of an event that was actually, I suppose, the start of the European Union presidency. You'd expect journalism to kind of get into what the European Union actually is all about and why there might be some problematic elements to it. Like one of the questions that was raised in the Seanad, I think it was yesterday by Tom Clonan, was the fact that during the European Union presidency, we have French, Portuguese and British naval ships and military in our airspace, possibly also in Irish territory. Tom Clonan raises the question that maybe we have military personnel from those 3 NATO members actually in the Oireachtas buildings in Leinster House. We actually don't know. And he calls out the fact that we haven't had any discussion about this. So instead of having journalism and media outlets that actually get into the nitty-gritty of what the European Union is all about, what's going on with Ireland during the presidency, we instead get somebody had potatoes at the party, and somebody
W.B. Yeats's picture was on the water bottle.
Somebody gave somebody a wallop on the back. The Ryanair flight was delayed. That all of the
potato, cheese, and onion or something.
See, exactly. That's what you know. Like, you read the thing and you're actually wondering, like, was it smoky bacon or you know, or did they get a Club Orange because she mentions they're all ushered off for refreshments.
So that was the 21st party for the Ditch podcast, The Party Line. I hope you enjoyed it. We will not be stopping throughout the rest of the summer. August episodes will appear as per usual, we hope, anyway, on Friday. And we look forward to seeing you again. In the meantime, go to ontheditch.com. Keep reading The Ditch. Keep following The Party Line. Thanks very much.